My name is Adam Buckner, and this is a Unity's live training session for this week. So let's talk about some things. Let's talk about tips and tricks. One of the tips and tricks that I wanted to show you is simply from our site, Internal Tips and Tricks by Tim Cooper. This was done at a conference a while back last year, and I think it would be disingenuous of me to just sort of play this in full screen mode and walk away. So I'm not going to do that, but I am going to go ahead and I'm going to give you the URL so that you can look that up on your own free time. And I will post the URLs with the lesson when we put those up. But this is more high-end stuff, talking about the profiler and smart data structures and that sort of stuff, and serialization, which he's very good at. And then while I was nosing around for additional information, I found this site, which was primarily about working in groups, 50 tips for working with Unity best practices, and like I said, primarily for working for small teams of 3 to 20 people. And then lastly, there's this nice site here, which I like, which has got some fun stuff on it called unitygems.com. And for those people out there who speak French, there is also a French version. And this website is actually based in France, and I believe that the author is French, but conveniently also gives us some guides in English. So I thought I'd pass those on, and then I'll make sure I get those up on the website as well. So some fun things for you to look at. So let's get into having some tips and tricks in our version. So we're not looking at somebody else's tips and tricks. I want to talk about custom classes and lists and arrays and little ways that sort of we can make things work a little bit faster when we're working in the editor. When we're writing a script, go ahead and make a C# script. Because I tested out some things today, and then I backed out of it so we could do it in class. So let's go ahead and make a example script here. So we've got a little example script of C#. And when we're declaring our variables at the top, we can ask for a public int, my int, and public float, my float. And we want to use these for a number of different purposes. A public game object reference, my go, and maybe also public transform, my transform. And when we save this, and let's go back to Unity, and we put it on, let's create a new empty game object, and let's put this example script on our empty game object. And we take a look at it in the inspector, and we can see, it's got a whole bunch of some variables there to fill in, some properties that we can fill in. If we end up with a very large script with lots and lots of information and lots of material, and say they're grouped into stuff where these are the variables that are related to our player class. And if we want all of these to be in our player, and we want them separated out from all of the other things that happen to be in our script, one of the things that we can do for convenience is we can wrap this up into a little class. And you shouldn't be afraid of doing this, even if you're only going to be using these once. It's very easy to say, well, I'm not going to be using multiple versions of this class. Why would I want to make a specific class out of these 4 variables? But if we did, a public class, player details, and then we simply put all of this information into our player details, and then we made an instance of our player details. My player. And it will be contained inside our inspector. There's one thing that we need to do, however, and people who've been around for a while will understand what this is when this compiles, that we don't see that the instance of that class. So we have to remember to use our attributes, and I'll go in and I'll talk about more attributes later on today if we have time. But we need to make sure that we tell Unity to serialize this particular class. So we put in the attribute system serializable. And when we save that and come back to Unity, we can see that instance of that class. And that instance of that class is in a neat little turndown. So we can organize some of our scripts in our hierarchy. We can also get into property drawers and custom inspectors, but in this case, just sort of a simple little trick, and then if we had something else, another public class for my, I don't know, I'm going to completely invent here my enemy details. This is probably not really what you'd want to do, but it gives us an idea. our enemy details, my enemy. Ooh, and my serializable. So with that saved, you can start to see when we get back to Unity that we now have our inspector. We can now organize, we can start to organize the way that our inspector looks without getting into the details of writing either a custom inspector or property drawers for that particular class. So I'm going to go ahead and read chat. Would it be better to have a single character class and then use the character class my player and the character class my enemy? Yes, you could do that. The main tip and trick here is organizing the inspector in sort of a simple way. If you're reusing these, you would want to have a little bit more organization to it than I have. I'm just picking two random classes. I mean, we could have called those sample class 1 and sample class 2, but I found that a bit boring. The main idea is that if you want to contain the content of this script, the inspector in this script, without having to write some custom code for it in the inspector, that you can simply use classes to make a little turn down, even if you're using only one instance of that class. So the other thing that you can do with these, especially when you're looking at making the inspector a little bit more user-friendly, is if we made a list. Well, you can make an array. So let's first look at our typical array. So let's make a player details. Let's make these an array of each one of these. And when I come to Unity, so we now have two lists of. Not 55, please. That's enough. We have two lists of this particular class. And we can see that each element is listed as element 0, element 1, element 2, element 3. One of the neat little tips and tricks is that if you happen to have a string in your class, let's take our player details and let's make this a public string, my string. And let's do the same thing for our enemy, just because we've got them both going. And we save these, and we come back to Unity. When that string is empty, we can see that it's element 0. But let's give this a name, like big sword. We can see that now our element is taking on that name, black helm, jetpack. The jetpack is one word or two. How do you spell jetpack? Is it one thing or is it two things or is it hyphenated? Jetpack. Brontosaurus. The Brontosaurus jetpack. Well, it's too long to spell. Let's just say dinosaur. We've got our example here, and volcano. Just random words. And we can... Volcano. I'll learn to spell if I'm going to make a joke. And we can now see that our class has been given the name of the of that first string here in the list. So the list actually has a name, as opposed to when we look at the enemy elements 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now these are built-in arrays. We could make generic lists, and I think that people should use generic lists. I prefer lists over arrays. The new generic lists, I mean, relatively new for me, are just as quick, just as fast as the built-in arrays, but they are more versatile. And to do that, you need to say using, and then we need to be system.collections.generic. So we need to use a new namespace. So can you stop talking so you can pee? Yes, use the pause button. No, unfortunately, I can't. I'll try to go slow. How's that? If you need to pee during the middle of the session. So we're using system collections generic, and then we can turn these arrays into lists. So we can make it a public list. And the way that you do lists is you identify it as a list, and then you put the type inside the angle brackets, and this is going to be our player details. And you can see, other than that, it's very similar to the way that we've declared our array. So I'm going to save. And now looking at our list and our array in Unity, other than the fact that I will probably not... Oh, it persisted. I didn't know it did that implicitly. That's very nice. We have a list. They look exactly the same. The big advantage I find with lists is that you can resize them so that you can add and remove items from the list without having to actually physically resize the array at runtime, which is really nice for me because I find that's much, much easier to deal with than having to back everything out of an array, make the array bigger, put everything back in it. Whereas the list just seems to just work the way you want it to, and it's not slow, which has plagued some other sort of collections that you can have. When dealing with lists, and we've set up that list to be public, and we populate these lists during edit time, but we want to use it efficiently during our runtime, and we want to be able to look something up. We want to find something in that list, and what would be a sort of a normal way of doing something is if you needed to do a find, you'd have your function, find item, and then you'd give it, an item, my item, item, and then you'd do a for loop. I'm just going to make some, you know how to write a for loop. So we write a for loop for the list, and then if the item is the same as my item, then we can do something with it. Back pocket code, I apologize. But this means to find one thing in that list, you need to iterate through that list, the entire list, every single time. What you really want to be able to do is look up that single item in that list immediately, just by going straight to that to the item you're looking for. And to do that, you need to have a dictionary. Because a dictionary, you can give the dictionary a keyword and use that keyword to look up the object. And one of the things that you can do, and it's not bad to do in Start, is you can zip a list or an array into a dictionary. So what you need to have is a private dictionary. And I'm going to make this a generic dictionary. So I'm going to have a private dictionary. We need to have a key, which is going to be string. And then our type, which we'll just call items. So then in Start, or in an init function, we can say that our items is going to be equal to a new dictionary, and it's going to be, of the string and player details, just to get the idea across. And then you just make a quick for loop, and you say for, int I equals 0, I is less than .count or .length, depending on whether you're doing an array or a list, then your I++. And then on each iteration, you just simply take your items, and in this case, it's why I like to use generics, is your items.add, and then your index of I, and then your item name, whatever your string was, in our case, my string, and then the item itself. I think you get the idea. So you can grab that list that we have, and then you can sort of shove that stuff into a dictionary, and then later on, when you're running your game, you can simply use that key, that string key, to find the specific item that you're looking for. I'm going ahead and reading the chat. So I've been told that jetpack is actually 2 words. Kato, the array is looking good for my inventory class. Definitely, if you're looking at saving items, look at scriptable objects. And we can answer some more questions in Q&A. So when we're dealing with lists and arrays, which is basically sort of a primer on how things work with lists and arrays, pretty obvious that we've got a size at the top. We change the size, and we get more items. You end up with 0, and ends up clearing out that list. If we make it bigger using the size, it's going to simply duplicate the objects at the bottom. If we make it smaller, it's going to remove the items from the bottom up. On the other hand, we can also pick items in the middle, and we can duplicate them. So if you want to be able to push something to the middle of a list, you can just take an item and you can duplicate. If you want to remove an item from the middle of the list, the command delete or edit delete, delete, there we go, will remove an item from the center and shuffle everything down. So you can add in the middle, remove from the middle, and add and remove from the end just by changing that size when you're dealing with the array. Or a list. We're talking about lists and arrays. They act and behave identically in the inspector. And as we've just seen today, which I was quite surprised by, you can change an array to a list, and Unity is able to keep track of it. I didn't realize that you could do that. One other thing that's neat, I don't know if we covered this before, which is that if we have a list and we've got multiple things that we want to put into it, let's say we have a game object list, public game object. My game objects. And we want to add multiple game objects to this list, and we have a bunch of cubes, or spheres in this case, and we have a ton of them, and we want to add all of these to this list. We can't multiply select all of these game objects and drag them in, because by the time we multiple select the items in a hierarchy, we are then changing our focus, and we're no longer on the object that needs to be filled. So what we can do is lock the inspector, and then we can grab all of the game objects that we want, and then we can drag those in. And see that I'm not putting it down here over the 0, I'm putting it here over the name in the header, and we can see that's added all of those items into that list or that array. Scale and orientation. Let's talk about scale and orientation. When we bring in a model, what's the best way to have it scaled, and what's the best orientation for it? Well, Unity has a Unity unit, and a Unity unit is the size of our cube. And if we look at our physics system by going to Edit, Project Setting, Physics, we have our gravity, and our gravity by default is on the Y, negative 9.81. And so this implies meters per second. Now, these are arbitrary units. There is no specific scale or size inside Unity. But in general, Unity is tuned to 1 meter per unit, and that's not a bad way of working. So when you're dealing with bringing in a model, the best thing to do is to pick, the first best thing to do is to pick a set of units that you can correspond with, that make you feel comfortable, and that you stick to. Whether it is 1 Unity unit is a centimeter, 1 Unity unit is a mile, and then you might need to be very clever if you're using the built-in physics system and gravity to adjust that so that it works. But I do find in general sticking to 1 Unity unit per meter is a good thing. And if you're worried and you're not sure how your scale is working out, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create a light just because I thought our cube's looking boring there, is that if you're not sure how it's going to work out, then what you should do is go to your software, your modeling program, your 3D modeling program, and save out or export a cube. So I've got the default Blender cube here, and I'm going to go ahead and do a save. And I'm going to save, yep, we're set up to, let's make this cube.blend. And then when we come back to Unity, we should get our cube.blend. And then we can just drop that into the scene, and we can compare to see whether our cubes are the same size. We can get rid of our perspective if we want to and put them back side by side. And in this case, we can see that the default Blender cube seems bigger. Well, and that's because the default Blender cube is bigger. It happens to be 2 by 2, oddly enough. So we need to make sure that we have our units scaled appropriately. Blender is set up to 1 unit being about 1 meter. There are some deceptive parts to it. Like I said, is that this particular cube is scaled 2 by 2, the default cube. So you just need to be aware when you're dealing with your scale to make sure that you have a scale that you want and a scale that works inside Unity and a scale that is consistent. The other thing to look at is a model in Blender. Ooh, yuck and ugly. Let me just quickly readjust this for a second. Speaking of not prepping things, so this is a model that I made a long time ago, and it's just purely here today for observational purposes. So we've got a model here, and when we look at it inside Unity and Blender, they are oriented the same. They've got the nose running down. Let me just look at it from the top down. We've got our nose running down the z-axis, and we've got our wings along the x-axis. And when we look at this same ship inside Unity, we can see that it looks like it's pointing up. And this is because when we're looking at our model, Unity has seen that it's an FBX file and automatically has given it minus 90 degree correction. If we remove that, we can see that it is lying straight with the nose along the Z and our wings along the X. Let me get rid of that cube. So, yes, in one sense, these are aligned the same, but they appear differently, and that's because the application has a different form of up. Inside Blender, it's a Y, it's Z up and Y away. So to get this ship to be oriented correctly, I need to make sure that I've modeled it with a nose sticking up. The nose of my spaceship is aligned along the Z-axis, but the Z-axis is represented differently in these two different software packages. Look at something different, like you look at Modo, and you'll see that Modo is a Y up, Z away, just like Unity is, and also has a one-to-one unit structure. But other applications you can choose, whether you're Y up or Z up, and often modeling applications will have a smaller unit, like Maya and Max, I believe, default to centimeters as their default unit. So you need to be careful. And that's also one of the reasons why if you bring in an FBX file, so let's go ahead and save this, this spaceship. Oh, no, not save as, excuse me. Cancel, we want to export. But if we export this as an FBX file, and note that I'm going to change this to ship FBX. I'm going to show you this in a second. Export FBX file. And then we come back to Unity. We'll see our ship FBX, and we drag that in. And we frame selected. It's tiny. Why is it so tiny? Correct its position there, and it's just microscopic. And this is because in Unity's import settings, if we look at the ship FBX, its scale factor is 0.01, whereas the original ship from Blender is coming in at 0.1. And this is because the assumption is that more modeling packages that you will export an FBX from have a default unit size of centimeters rather than meters. So the default scale factor for an FBX is 0.01. So you just simply need to correct that here. Don't correct this in your modeling program. So you've already done the challenge. You've got 1 unit equaling 1 meter. You bring that in. You suddenly see it so small. Don't go into your modeling package and try to, make it 100 times, scale it up 100 times. Then you're bringing it in to Unity, and then your scale factor is 0.01 on your import. So simply change that scale factor to 1 and apply. Oops, where's apply on these dice? There we go. It's up there. And now you can see we've got 1-to-1 in both of those models. Well, I was hoping to get a little bit farther along, but I may push this to Q&A. So we've looked at lists, and we've looked at arrays, and we've looked at orientation and scale. So do you guys have any questions that I can answer? So I was using Blender for that. It's a free 3D modeling package. Mr. Jim Gamer, physically based shaders versus current shaders in Unity. Well, there are physical based shaders that you can get as third party, and we've got a physical based shader that you will see coming in 5. Well, you've got your choice: mechanical keyboard or shuffling papers. I do have notes on papers. I'm sorry, I'm just that way, old school, which I'm sure drives some people to distraction. Why does he have paper? I compose very well on paper. So, any questions today for our sadly short session? It doesn't have to be related to tips and tricks. It could be related to anything that you would like to have an answer to. I can talk about using colliders. I think I've got, do I have the prefab here? The question is did I import the prefab? I don't think I did. I got my UFO. No, I don't think I saved the prefab. Oh, maybe I did. Maybe I saved it in ship models. Oh, I did. Primitive colliders. Don't use a mesh collider. Use primitive shapes. This is all using cubes. And one sphere, I believe, in the middle. So if I turn off the ship model mesh renderer, that leaves us with the compound colliders that I'm using as children. So these are all the colliders that I'm using. Oh, let's turn those gizmos down. So because you don't want to be using a mesh collider for something that complicated. Eddie Lopez Jr. says, do you know a way to make a shader in Unity and use it in 3ds Max? No, the answer is it really can't be. The architecture of materials is so unique to every software package that you can't really make a material in one application and then you try to use it in another. You can come close to replicating that, but applications have their own method for making materials. Yes, cubes and a sphere. Oops, come back here. So, yeah, cubes and a sphere. And then we just put the mesh render back on. Doop. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like there's either a problem with your keyboard if you can't get double quotes in monodevelop, or it's a problem with either the keyboard itself or a problem with the language settings. So the keyboard is being misinterpreted, and though the key is being held down correctly, the operating system feels the double quote should be on a different key. That must be something strange with the mapping, because you're talking about just doing string, where you're saying, you know, public string, my string equals, this is in double quotes. Well, it's working on mine. Is there any chance you could have a bum keyboard? Are you saying it only doesn't work in monodevelop? So you know your keys are working in other applications. So oboe shape, if I import an asset package from the asset store, if I move one of the animations out to another folder, would it be safe to delete the remainder of the asset package that I imported? Just wondering what's safe to delete once you take something from a package and reuse it. You can remove, as long as it's an asset, you can feel free to dump anything that you don't want. I mean, so if we come to, and you can also choose to do this on import. So if I'm importing something, let's import the 2D pack. I think the 2D pack will get us to where we're going. Samples 2D pack. And when you import it, this is the same as importing something, a package that someone has given you. It doesn't have to be from the asset store. I'm going to say none. I can just simply say what I want from this list is the sprites. I want the sprites folder, and I want this sprites folder. And I can choose not to import any of the rest of them, or I just want the fonts folder, none, and I just want the fonts. Now, where it could be a problem is if you're dealing with something that has dependencies. I could import these prefabs. Example games, hat trick, prefabs. And you can see that we now have a missing script, and we have a missing sprite. So it is possible to bring things in that are missing dependencies, missing the audio clip on the explosion. But if you just simply want an animation and you know that there are no dependencies, or you want an image and you know there are no dependencies, you can feel free to delete everything else, or simply only import the one thing that you're looking for. Shadeless, Adam, are there any examples for using IEnumerator to go through lists or arrays? I mean, you're just talking about whether you go through a list using a coroutine. So what, a very huge list and you want to process only a small amount at a time. Is that what you mean? Could you go ahead and give me an example of what you would want to do with an IEnumerator and a list? Sutros? What is the meaning of life, the universe, and everything? Very simple, it's 42. I don't really know the meaning of the question. Dr. TM, can you suggest a good program for drawing 2D games? I would use Photoshop, or if I didn't have the money, I would use GIMP. I have not looked at Photoshop now that Adobe has gone to the cloud, so it may be affordable since I think they're just renting it now. Any chance of making weapon switching, weapon inventory tutorial for Unity, something similar to Watch Dogs radial menu? I think I'm going to save off on most of those things that have to do with menus, Xanadu, until we get the 4.6 and the UGUI release, because most of the stuff that we do that's going to be UI related, and UIs are and inventories are very heavily UI related, will simply become obsolete when 4.6 comes out. Ventril, can we have a session about lighting sprites in 2D space? Would be awesome. Well, hopefully you don't need to. In many cases, sprites don't need to be lit, and you can use an unlit texture, and it improves, you simply make the sprites look like the way you want them to, and you don't need to light them. So, and it improves the speed of your game quite significantly, because you're not trying to calculate how the light falls on an object and then how that surface would behave. Kaito, for making an inventory, would it be performance-wise fine to just do that list thing and then have a list of model prefabs for each item set in the list? Would I have my whole inventory instantiated all the time, hogging memory? I would leave the list in a scriptable object as an asset, and then access the pieces that you needed. I believe you would only be taking up the memory when you instantiated them. I could stand to be corrected on that one, but I would suggest having all of the inventory items in a list. I'd have one inventory item class, which would have all of the definitions of each item, including a reference to the model, and then I would leave that list in a scriptable object. Mr. Jim Gamer, how do I write post-processing effects? Post-processing effects are very similar to writing a shader, because to a degree what you are doing is taking an image from the camera, and then you're applying that to a texture, and then you are applying your post-processing effect on top of that. Is resizing in Unity a bad idea after importing your assets? Does it hinder performance or have any downsides? Yes, it does. Not staggeringly so, but if you don't need to resize your items, you should do it in your original modeling program or on import. So if you have a spaceship or you have an object and it's made in some arbitrary size, and you bring it in and you're adjusting every instance of it, then you should change that in your modeling program or on import. Yeah, you shouldn't be, if you're finding yourself having to resize stuff, but if you have to, you can. I mean, one of the things I've always said is that if you look at many MMOs that share their meshes, that one of the standard things that they do is they, if they have a dinosaur, they can have little tiny dinosaurs and medium dinosaurs and big wonking dinosaurs, all of which share the same mesh, and they're scaling those. So it isn't a terrible thing to do. Uniform scaling is better than non-uniform scaling, so scale it evenly on all three axes. But if you need to scale your model, do. But if you don't need to scale your model, don't, and do that before you import. Hundept, how do you open the asset manager? I'm not sure what the asset manager is. Do you mean the asset store? Asset store is Command or Control 9 or Windows Asset Store, and that brings up the asset store. If I'm misinterpreting that, go ahead and tell me what it is that you're looking for. Performance related, is there any loss in a game object disabled in the scene? Is this object simply ignored? Yeah, it pretty much is ignored. And remember, there's two different terms here. There is active, which is the game object itself, and there is enabled, which is a component on that game object. So we enable and disable the mesh renderer. We enable and disable the audio source, and we deactivate and reactivate a game object. So an inactive game object, as far as I know, is taking up memory, but it's not being processed. So it's skipped, and all of the contents on it. Crumble and Custard. Wouldn't mind seeing best practice and techniques when targeting multiple platforms and resolution. That's a difficult one, and I'm sort of working on a specific class for that. A lot of that has to do with UI, and as such, it's waiting to 4.6 because many other things adapt relatively well to different resolutions and different devices, more so than UIs do. There are some level of detail and other issues that you can deal with. It is on the list of potential classes. It's not trivial. Venril, I do want some nice dynamic lighting on moving objects and baked lights instead of a tiled map. As a result, I'm getting kind of messed up. If it's complicated and you've got a specific thing going on with your game, that's definitely what the forum is for. Post a work in progress and show people where you are, and then again I say PM me and I'll keep looking and pointing people in the right direction and try to get you through whatever your pain points are. Do I know how to make a spider robot thing that can climb on walls? Not specifically, but I know it can be done. You'd be looking at the wall normal and you'd be ignoring physics gravity, but yeah, certainly it can be done. It takes a little bit of thought. Thank you, Mr. Jim Gamer. I've got a long way to become even more awesome. Thank you for appreciating it. Is there any place I can find a guide on AI bots? I would take a look at AI game dev. It's a bit of a dig, but it's sort of the place that people go. It is the website for AI game dev. And I've had some involvement with them working on some very simple AI and, talking in the forums and asking people how to approach a simple problem. But it certainly is a good place to start. Z Frisk, are there some complete town projects I'm looking for to create a horror game? I would strongly suggest looking at the asset store. I've been messaging about light mapping. If I bake point lights as well as directional lights to say into a terrain, do I have to have another directional pass to light the model, the player during runtime? Oboe-shaped light probes. The solution to really baked lighting on moving objects is light probes, which we should look into documentation. Yeah, pro only. And what these do is they you block out locations in your scene. Come on, let's drag that to the side. Okie. And each one of these probes takes a sample of the lighting in that location. And then later, when your character moves through it, that is applied to the character. And you can see they've got one character theoretically back here and one here with different lighting. And it will blend the lighting based on the location of the character in that location. So you bake these as well. So you bake your light maps for static objects onto the surface, and then you bake the light probes for dynamic objects. But it is a pro-only feature. Okay, and I've lost chat. Oh no! I think I've replaced chat, which means I'm going to have to come back to Twitch, and I will have lost all your questions, which is annoying. Thank you, Twitch. When you leave the page, the chat is gone. Well, it's getting late anyway. At this point, I have no questions. I have an empty chat. No, Zelen has just said, any chance of the Unite 2014 Training Day project will be made more widely available? It looks awesome. As far as I know, we're going to release that sometime after Unite, after the training day is over. We will make that available on our site. So if anybody else has any really pressing questions, I'd better spit them into the chat channel now as I wind down. Doctor, the things that Unity puts on the asset store are free to use and publish games. Check the license for everything else. Yeah, if you look at the asset store, it does have a base license. Come back up, Mr. Asset Store. But certainly when you sign up, you'll get your end user's license agreement for the asset store. And it'll tell you all about it. But the whole point to the asset store is you're buying assets. Yeah, terms of service and EULA here at the bottom. You're buying these assets for your game. The only thing to really be aware of is that some of these have per seat licenses, especially if you're dealing with editor extensions and things that are more behind the scenes, where you need to buy one license per seat, whereas usually assets, it's one license per studio. Not today, Mr. Jim Gamer. Asset real-time ambient inclusion Unity 5. I'm going to sort of save up most of that stuff for Unity 5 when we ramp up closer to it. Partly because things could change. And there's some good promo videos out there, but it's still in alpha state. 4.6 is in beta and getting ready to be released, and 5 is in alpha. You know, I don't want to comment too much about things that could be potentially change. Oboe Shape. As far as I'm led to believe, all Unity Technology asset store submissions are free to use. Unity Technologies store submissions, yes, are free to use in indie games and commercially. Just read the small print. Yes, that's absolutely true. There's only a few things, oddly enough, that you have to charge, that they charge for. There's some models that, for whatever the licensing agreement is, are for a small fee. But everything else that's Unity Technologies related is perfectly fine in commercial work as well. The only thing that you can't do, as far as I'm aware, is publish commercial work with the Pro Trial license. So if you're on the 30-day trial, you can't make a published paid-for game using Pro features, and you can't resell Unity's free assets. It's created so that you can use them in your game, and you can release your game, and you can sell your game, not resell the assets. Tish, sorry about that. What is bake? It's an interesting term that has come from the CG world. The idea is that it's like rendering. You're essentially rendering something down. This may fail. So if something goes wrong, don't blame me. Let's create a new scene. Let's just save that one. And then let's create a plane. So there's our plane. And then let's put on it a cube. Plane. Let's create a cube. So there's our cube. And then let's make a cylinder. Why not? We're just putting some silly stuff in our scene here. And then let's create a quad. And then we'll see there's our quad there. And then rotate it something random. Let's grab it from the middle. There we go. And then back to moving it somewhere else. So then we're going to add some lights. Let's add a directional light. And then let's give it some shadows. And then let's add some point lights. And let's give it some color as well. Now, I haven't fussed a lot with this. And then let's give it some color. And then let's give our directional light some color as well. It's all generally looking kind of ugly, isn't it? Too bright on our directional light. And let's duplicate this one again. Give it a different color. Now, these are real-time lights. And let's look at our camera. Where do we want it? Forward rendering. Anyway, so the idea is that if you come up here and you bake, and I haven't done this in a while, light mapping. And you can bake these shadows, you can bake these lights into the scene. Now, these need to be static. One of the big things is that you have to make sure when you do this is that your items aren't going to move. So I'm going to grab everything except for my main camera, and I'm going to make it static, which is telling Unity that we're not going to move any of these objects. So these are going to be static objects so we can bake into them. And then, so let's bring up our light mapping window. And let's... okay, save the scene. Scenes, bake. So this is creating, and I'll show you these in a second. What's done is now importing the light maps that we've made. Okay. And so we've got our bake folder, and it basically makes a texture. And it keeps track of where the lights are, and it's overlaying this on top of the geometry. And these aren't supposed to move. But I can. And now see what's happened to the shadows. Those shadows are what's called baked into the scene. And so I don't have to render my real-time lights on these anymore. Those shadows are there. So the idea is that as opposed to every frame doing some hardcore calculations to get some really detailed lighting, you can do that offline. You can bake where the shadows are, bake where the highlights are. You can start to mix your colors together. And then it's saved, and it's saved into a texture. And then those textures are used very quickly and efficiently to continue to light static objects. Now you have to be careful, because if you do something like we've done here and you have a barrel that's sitting in the corner and then your player blows up the barrel and you've light mapped it, you're going to leave a shadow where there is no object to cast it. Could I talk about on application exit? What do you want to know? Essentially it is a function that's called when you quit. So if you want to do something on application exit, like automatically save the game. It won't save you if you've crashed the game or if there's some other ways that you can force the game to quit faster than Unity can expect. But essentially, if you go and you normally say, I would like to quit, please, there will be an on-application quit sent that will allow you to put calls inside that function, and that will be executed just before you quit your game. And scripting API. Lovely thing. On application quit. I'm going ahead and I'm reading. Some of these may have scrolled off. I'm seeing that you're talking about touches and touch lines, but it seems to me that you've got a good answer on that. Baking can be done in the free version. Yes, it's light probes that are currently the pro part of that. Baking can last a long time, and I have 8 processors. It's an older machine, but I do have 8 processors, so it does go quicker. Ultimately, some of the best ways to go is to try to bake as much stuff as you can into light maps and light probes. Okay, yeah, I think I'm going to wrap it up too. That was more Q&A than it was, it was on the normal session, which I like to do, but we'll try to get some more normal session back again when we do the next tips and tricks, because we've got a lot more to go. And definitely watch those videos that I linked you to at the beginning, and come back to the website, and you can be able to, we'll have those links posted there. So let me just say, thanks for coming, and follow us. Follow us at Unity 3D, follow us at Mike Geig, follow us at Will Goldstone, and follow us at The Ant Ranch. And if you have any questions, comments, criticisms, suggestions, take a look at us on the forum and leave us a suggestion under Teaching for Live Training. Anyway, thank you very much, and I will talk to you later.